Okay, it's Parshat Vayakhel and Pekudei, double parsha this week. Right before, we'll also be doing Parshat Parah, which is sort of connected to what I'm going to speak about also, although I'm not really going to cover it. And Vayakhel and Pekudei, I think in a certain way, gets a bad rap, right? Because people see it as basically just like a repetition, right? You've had already... A couple of weeks ago, you had Parshat Terumah and Tetzaveh. Sometimes they're together, sometimes not. But you have the tzivoy to build the mishkan, all the kelim. Then you have the bigdei kehunah. You have Bitzalel, who's the one who's told to build it, who's going to be the one who's going to build it. Then in the middle of Kitisa, you get into the whole thing with the luchot, the Cheit HaEigel. And then, after that's all cleaned up, second set of luchot, Moshe gets forgiveness for Bnei Israel. Then you have Parshat Vayakhel and Pekudei, which seems to be more or less just the same thing over and over again. Again, you have Bitzalel as the one who's going to be the lead architect and builder of the mishkan, and you've got the building of the mishkan and the giving of the bigdei kehunah to Aron and his sons. So people just look at it as like basically we've done this already. It's just a repetition. It seems like a massive amount to repeat when you consider how few details there are about all sorts of major halachot and even certain stories. It just seems like 4.5 parshiyot, which really could have been much shorter. But really. What I hope to show tonight is that really there's a very, very serious and profound message that's being shared with the fact that everything is repeated. Because again, it's you have the repetition of the mishkan, you have the repetition of the bigdei kehunah, the repetition of Bitzalel doing it. You have the two sets of the luchot, the first and the second set. You have, it's just repetition after repetition after repetition. But I think there's a very, very important message there. So there's a famous machloket between Rashi and Ramban. Right, Rashi is the one who, much more often than the Ramban, is willing to use the concept of ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah, right? That the Torah does not have inherent chronological order, and that something that appears earlier might actually happen later, right? So for Rashi, when we have after Parshat Mishpatim, when you have the mishkan, the Terumah and Tetzaveh, for Rashi, really the tzivoy for the mishkan did not come until after the Cheit HaEigel, ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah. The Ramban, who occasionally will make use of that, but only if he's really, really stuck, says no, the tzivoy was actually given beforehand, but it was actually built afterwards. And this is, of course, they're not making up these whole ideas. This is a machloka which already at that time had taken place about 1,000 years earlier between the Chachamim. Right, you have a number of midrashim which talk about when was the tzivoy given, when did the building actually happen. So, for example, Rav Kasher quotes Rav Menachem Kasher, wrote the Torah Shlema, which I've mentioned before. Really fantastic sefer. So it says as follows: Daber b'nei Israel, the first, basically the very first words of the parsha. Kevan shekiblu Yisrael malchut shamayim besimcha va'amru kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma. Right, when Bnei Israel accepted God's rulership with joy, and they said everything that God says na'aseh v'nishma, very, very famous words. Miyad amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu LaMoshe daber al Bnei Israel v'yikchu li truma. Right away, God said, speak to Bnei Israel, gather for me, all the donations they have to make, and build for me a mishkan, right? And this is actually the view of the Ramban, that what's going on over here is that there's, again, he says perfectly, order, right? At the end of Mishpatim, that's where you have Na'aseh v'Nishma, and then it has the mishkan. Nothing to do with the Cheit HaEigel. There was the building of the mishkan, which is supposed to take place right away. Whereas Rashi takes a very, very different We'll see Rashi takes a very, very different approach and says that no, it's actually the mishkan was actually kind of like basically involved a kapara for Bnei Israel, right? It's in Midrash Rabbah and Shemot Rabbah. It says as follows in Lamed Gimel Gimel for all those who are keeping track at home. Right, Davar Acher veYichuli Terumah, quotes the pasuk. Hu hada Amar Ani Yeshena v'libi er. Right, I'm sleeping, my heart is up. Amra Knesset Israel. Right, Knesset Israel, meaning the Jewish people said, Ani Yashanti, I'm sleeping. Ani Yashanti min haketz, like I thought basically God was never going to redeem us. Ela Kadosh Baruch Hu er, but God is awake. And he gives a couple of examples like this, and then he says, Ani Yashanti yeshena mimaseh ha'egel. I thought after the Egel, I thought I had messed up. I'd given up on ever being forgiven. V'libi er. Kadosh Baruch Hu martik alai ve'yichuli Terumah. Right, God basically gave me forgiveness and said, "Take from me Terumah, build a mishkan." So here you have these midrashim which Rashi and the Ramban argue over. When was it the tzivoy given before, or was it after? Was the mishkan lechatchila that there had to be a mishkan either way, or was it basically a kapara? Is the mishkan, as the Ramban says, is it basically a portable Har Sinai, a way of bringing God with you, or is it a way to get forgiveness for the Cheit HaEigel? And what I'd like to suggest is that really it's both. That really there's two different models as to what we're supposed to happen. There's an ideal and there's a real, right? That there's basically that, there's this ideal relationship with God where, so to speak, would be the perfect relationship with God. And in that, there's the perfect mishkan, and there's the perfect luchot, and there's the perfect Betzalel, and the perfect aron, and the perfect mishkan. But that inherently we can't fully ever grasp God. We can never ever have that perfect ideal relationship where everything works perfectly. It's just we're human. There automatically has to be this distance, and therefore there's part two. There's after the Cheit HaEigel, which as we'll see, and I think Chazal say this, that it had to happen, and the breaking the luchot had to happen. Then there's the real mishkan, and there's the real aron, and the real Betzalel, and the real the real mishkan, the real aron. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to show the two different models that we're talking about, right? So we just mentioned the first one, the Ramban approach, which says that the mishkan was a response to Na'aseh v'Nishma. That Bnei Israel reached this incredibly high level, right? The Midrash even says that when they said Na'aseh v'Nishma, it was like they were speaking like the angels, right? That they had somehow tapped into this like secret of creation. They'd reached this incredibly high level, and with this, God says, okay, now build the mishkan, right? The mishkan is going to be this very, very high level, this ideal, as we'll see, it's like literally almost like a second creation of the world, right? There had been the initial creation of the world. Adam had sinned, right? Ruining the initial creation. And now Bnei Israel, by Har Sinai, we're going to finally fix it up. And it's going to be like, not just Matan Torah, but creation of the world, part two, right? So just a couple of examples, right? So ideally, at the beginning, right, it was supposed to be a response to Na'aseh v'Nishma. It was supposed to be a response to this high level. It was the aron was going to be the aron ha'edut. Why? Why is it called the aron ha'edut? Because it was going to have either the Torah or the luchot in it. One of them are like the luchot ha'edut. It was going to have the Torah, which represents this relationship with God. And then also there's this really interesting midrash. Let me see if I can find it, hopefully. Also brought down by the Torah Shlema, says as follows. Wow. 1 second. Okay. Terumah and Tetzaveh. Out here, give me 1 second. I think I know where it went. Again. Here we go. Right. Okay. So the Midrash says as follows. Right, what do all these different things represent? What are all the different materials? Right, there had to be, the pasuk says zahav, kesef, and nechoshet. There are all these different skins. So what does the Midrash say? Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Terumah mishkan keneged ha'elyonim. All the donations were represented the heavens. Zahav, the gold, represents the sun. Kesef represents the silver, represents the moon. Nechoshet represents the west when the sun is setting. And it goes on and gives all these examples. Again, what's the idea? That the mishkan is basically, again, going to be ma'aseh bereshit. It's going to be creation again. It's going to be, again, this massive tikkun for the Cheit of Adam Harishon, where again Bnei Israel are going to, get back to where they were, right? And the Midrash even says, we said before, Na'aseh v'nishma, that when they said Na'aseh v'nishma, the angels came down and gave them these two crowns, and they had overcome the sin of Adam Harishon. That's what the Mishkan is supposed to represent. It's this ideal relationship with God. It's going back to what the relationship Adam is supposed to have. Similarly, you have Bezalel as the one who is building the Mishkan, right? You have, or is basically supervising the building of the Mishkan. Bezalel, who's a really fascinating character, and right, why is he chosen? So the Midrash says over here, Atam Moshe k'sha'ala Moshe l'marom. You find that when Moshe went up to the heavens, Her'elo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kol Klei HaMishkan. God showed him all of the kelim, the Mishkan. Again, it makes it sound like it's this. It's not just this building of stuff. It's this. It's something that God has to show you. God had to show Moshe the menorah. Kach, and it says Kach Kol Maseh Mishkan. All the when with that Ba Moshe le'reid. Savor shehu oseoto. He thought he was going to be the one who was going to actually be in charge of the building. Karalo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He said, God called him Amar lo Moshe, Melech asiticha. I've made you the king. Ein derech hamelech la'asot davar. It's not the way the king. The king doesn't build things. El gozer v'acharim osim. Right? What does the king do? He tells people what to do. Afata, so to you, ein lecha reshut la'asot davar. You're not going to be involved in this at all. Ella amor lahem v'henosin. Say to them, and they're going to do it, right? V'lo amar lo lemi yomar, but God didn't tell him who to do it to. Amar Moshe lemi yomer. Amar lo ani mar lecha. He said, who should I tell? And God said, I'll let you know. You'll find out. Umasa HaKadosh Baruch Hu hevilo sifro shel Adam Harishon. Again, connecting it to Adam Harishon, the beginning of the world. V'her'elo kol hadorot shehin atidin la'amod mi breshit ad chiyat hametim. He showed him all the generations of man from the beginning of the world to the end of the world. Dor dor umalachav, every generation and its kings. Dor dor aman higav, every generation and its leaders. Dor dor neviav, every generation and its neviim. Amru lo kol echad ve'echad kantiv me'oto sha'ah v'chein Bezalel me'oto sha'ah. From the very beginning of the world, Bezalel had been directed as the one who was going to build it. Right? There's something about Bezalel. He's this very special person who has this quality of, he is the one who's going to build the Mishkan. Right? And in Masechet Brachot, it says a couple of things about him. Right? I mean, his name, play on words. Right? Betzel Kel. Right? In the shadow of God. Right? The Midrash brings down that Moshe understood that the building was supposed to be done in a certain way, and Bezalel disagreed with him, and Moshe checked with God, and actually, Bezalel was right. Betzel kel hayita. It's like you knew, like you were standing there, in the shadow. You heard what God wanted to do, right? It also says, sounding, practically Hasidic, right? Amar Rav. Yodea haya Bezalel letzaref otiyot shenibreu bahen shamayim va'aretz. I don't know exactly what this means, but Bezalel knew how to join the letters the way that God created the world. Again, we see this idea that the Mishkan is going to be Briat HaOlam Part 2. And why is Bezalel chosen? Because he's got whatever it takes is this I mean, again, because right, we say like Ein Tzor Kelokenu, Ein Sayar Kelokenu, right? God is the ultimate artist, and B'Tzalel is like the ultimate human representation of that. He's able to just like God created this beautiful world with everything in it, B'Tzalel has the ability to create the mishkan, which is going to represent this world. Right, and what's going to go in the aron? What's going to go in the mishkan? You have the luchot. The first set of luchot. These were not just any luchot. These were these very, very unique and special luchot. Right, there was nothing natural about them. Right, so for example, so the Midrash says, one second. The Midrash says, and again, there's all these fantastic, Midrashim. I mean, in the sense of, not just wonderful, but in the sense of like being like a fantasy, like almost like science fiction, right? Right. I mean, all these you have all these Midrashim which are just like literally. Right, it says, Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Anav Mikol Adam, he's this total genius, highest level person ever reached. And yet, what does it say? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, this is from Masechet Nedarim, Daf Lamechet Amar Aleph, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, B'tchila, Haya Moshe, Lamed Torah, U'mishachacha. Right, Moshe would learn the Torah and he'd forget it. He couldn't grasp it. Ach Nalo B'matana. Right, God had to give it to him as a gift. This initial Torah was like, it was something that even a Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't grasp. Or if you look, another midrash, again, very, very and it says, why Shnei Luchot Keneged Shamayim Va'aretz? It was like the heavens, it was like God giving something of himself from the heavens. Right? And what do we say about the, right? And it says Moshe goes up there and the Malachim are not happy. Right? The Malachim are actually pretty upset. They're like, God, these luchot which you created 974 generations before the world. Now, there's no such thing as generations before the world, but it means like 1,000 generations ago. This special Torah, which again is the whole blueprint again for creation. You're going to give it to Basar Vadam, and it's written Be'etzba Elokim, right? It has all these like cool features, right? It's made out of Sanperion, this like really supernatural type of stone. And the letters, right, the famous Midrash, right, what does it say? It says that the letters that they went through all the way, they were fully, engraved, and that the Samech and the Mem, which are basically circles, that it literally hovered in place. The middle of the Samech, the middle of the Mem actually hovered in place. Right now we would just say, it's just, magnetics. But it was, again, what Chazal are saying, there was something, these luchot were incredibly special. They were incredibly, this was God giving from above. They were written by God. Moshe just goes up to get them. There's nothing man-made about them. Again, the luchot represents the essence of God. This is like the ideal relationship. And yet what do Chazal tell us? They had to be broken, right? It's a very, very interesting midrash. Right? The midrash says that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu, there were 3 things that Moshe did on his own, without consulting with God, and God said, good job, Moshe. Right? And one of them, surprisingly enough, he added an extra day when it came to Matan Torah. He separated from his wife, and maybe if I can read this, also that he broke the luchot. He actually, so I can't find the inside because again it's small print, but he actually broke the luchot, even though, without God telling him to do it, right? And it says, and the Gemara says, how do we know that Moshe, that God agreed to it? It says, Asher Shibarta, they have a play on words, Yasher Kochacha Asher Shibarta, right? God said to him, the way the Ashkenazim would say it, Shkoyach, like good job, it was well done, you did the right thing in breaking it. Right? There's something, right? Chazal say it had to happen, just like, and they say, it's interesting, they say the same thing by the creation of the world, just like Adam had to sin, that the world, had to, so to speak, fall or break, or whatever it is that you want to say. Beforehand, Bnei Israel were not yet ready to stay on this high level. Right? That's only for Latid Lavo, B'Yimot HaMashiach. It's sort of like, for some reason, they had to fail over here as well. These luchot, and again, what I'm suggesting is, we can never fully, at least in this world, in a Mashiach world, we can never fully grasp God, right? Az Yamalei Schopinu Biyom Hahu Hashem Echad Shmachad. In this world, in this imperfect, world, God, we can never fully grasp God. So that this perfect mishkan, the perfect set of luchot, the perfect designer for it, it couldn't last. Right, and one more thing, right, and who is going to be the one who is going to serve in this perfect mishkan? Aron HaKohen, right? And I was thinking about it beforehand. What does Aron represent over here? And it seems to me, I didn't have a chance to really look whether anybody else says this. I haven't heard it before. Maybe someone says it. Maybe it's my own idea. Maybe it's even correct. I don't know. But if you think about it, who is Aron? Right? Moshe is told to go before Paro, and he keeps on pushing it off. I can't do it. Kvad peg, kvad lashon. Right? Either he has a speech impediment, or he doesn't speak the language, or whatever it is, he can't do it. And what does Hashem finally say to him? Okay, Aaron will be the one who speaks on your behalf. Right? Aaron is the one who has the ability to stand before God. But in that case, a king, but ultimately the king of all kings. Aron is the one who has the ability to stand and represent Bnei Israel, who finds the words, who finds the way to communicate with the king of all kings. Right? And this is this is the ideal that is set up over here. This is the situation that's supposed to be this, this perfect mishkan, the perfect luchot, the perfect kohen gadol, and the perfect designer. And yet again, as we said, it can't last. It's just this world, it represents kind of like a target, a goal. We yearn to have this perfect relationship with Hashem. We know it's impossible. Instead, we're left with an imperfect mishkan. We're left with Bitzalel being chosen for another reason, as we'll see, luchot, which are much less miraculous, and Aharon, who's on a much lower level. So let's take that now step by step. Right, in terms of, we mentioned one already before. We said that we quoted from Shemot Rabbah that Bnei Israel, after the Cheit HaEigel, what did they think? They thought we're cooked. We're never going to have this relationship back. And what were they given? They were given the Mishkan. The Mishkan is a chance to get it back. The Mishkan, the real world Mishkan, represents a second chance. It represents the idea of teshuvah, right? The whole thing is, right, it's as if, right, what do they show by building a Cheit HaEigel? Right? Why they need it? Because again, their relationship with God, they couldn't serve God who was not physical. Right? So what did they have to do? They had to create some sort of go-between. Right? Now they did it the wrong way. They didn't do it with God's permission. But what is the Mishkan? Right? And especially, you look at the Abarbanel points out, he says it's all got to be symbolic. You've got these angels, and you've got the table and the menorah. These are, with the flowers, and it says it's got to be symbolic. But again, it represents, basically, what is the Mishkan? It's the Eigel, except with God's permission. Right, that's the thing. You always say, if you took the stuff in the Mishkan and God didn't command it, what would you call, a box to put the Torah in, which had these angels made out of gold? You'd call it Avodah Zarah, except the fact that God said it. Right, the Mishkan now becomes, it's sort of like a b'diavad. It's like for them to be able to, they've done tshuva. It's a way for them to now draw close again. Right, and the Midrash, I was very excited when I saw this. Midrash Tanchuma actually says that even the aron itself changes. Right? We said before it's called the mishkan. It's called the aron ha'edut. Why? Because the edut was the Torah, which represents the testimony of God, was put into it. But really beautifully, it points out. Let's see if I can find this maybe. Okay, it says over here. Give me 1 second. Is in Terumah or is in Kitisa? Hold on. I always remember where it is when I'm at home. Let's get this in. Got 1 or 2 places I should be able to find it. Okay. Let's see, one more place. Right, the Midrash says, why is it called, after the sin, why is it called the, why is it called the aron haidut? Right, so it says, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, right, very famous pasuk. Imatay ne'amra l'Moshe parsha hazo shel mishkan b'yom ha'kippurim atzmo. Again, right, this is like the Rashi approach. This is, right, because we know what happens. Moshe goes up, Vav Sivan, Zayin Sivan, whatever it is, he comes down, Cheit HaEigel, 40 days, convinces God not to destroy them. Either there's another 40 days where he goes up, or 40 days where he's down. Then he goes up on Rosh Chodesh Elul, final forgiveness, and on Yom Kippur he comes down with the luchot. Right, so according to this Midrash, again, the second Mishkan, the second version of Mishkan is on Yom Kippur, again, a day of Kapara. This is now the making up. Right, it says, and even though God had already commanded beforehand, Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Shalom, Ein mukdam muchar b'Torah. Here's where Rashi gets it from. There's not always chronological order in the Torah. Now it says, right, it brings that what we just said in terms of the chronology. And he says, listen to this, Ulakach nikra mishkan ha'edut. Right, and after the sin, why is it called mishkan ha'edut? Shehu edut l'chol ba'ei ha'olam sha'kadosh baruch hu shochen b'mikdashchem. Right, it's the right. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu yavo zahav shabamishkan v'yechaper al zahav shenaseh bo ad egel. So it's proof that even after the sin, right? I mean, what is this all about? It's the idea. I mean, and this is why Chazal say it had to happen. The idea that kapara, the idea that you can fall to the lowest level. And the aron is testimony that even after you mess up in the worst way possible, God is still with you. God is still with the Jewish people. It goes from being the aron ha'edut as the place where the mishkan was where the luchot are going to be given. And what is it that's in the luchot? Very, very famous. It says in Masechet Baba Batra, it says luchot. V'shivrei luchot hayu ba'aron. Right, both of them were by the aron. Right, it represents both that first set, that broken set, which had to be broken. We can't have that ideal relationship, but it represents also this idea that God gave a second set, that Bnei Israel was going to be forgiven. So again, we see that it's we see that the aron has been transformed into an aron representing forgiveness, and the zahav, which before represented the gold with which God created the world, the sun, now is now a kapara for the Cheit HaEigel. Again, everything about the second set is about kapara, and we can add in a couple more things to this. What about Bitzalel? Right, so Bitzalel, it's interesting. We've just been calling him Bitzalel, but really, the Torah gives us his full lineage. Who is he? Bitzalel ben Uri ben Chor. Right, who was Chor?
Son of Miriam.
Right, it says the son of Miriam, and what happened to him? We barely ever hear of him. Let me see if I can find this over here. I won't get stuck on this if I can't. But what happened to Chor? Why do we barely hear of him?
He died, didn't he?
Right, it says that when Moshe went up to Har Sinai, he said, "Okay, I'm leaving Chor and Aron in charge." And you never hear from Chor again, right? Literally, the only time you ever see his name is when when it mentions Bitzalel. You never hear of him again, right? So let's see. Can I find this over here? I'll look quickly if I can find. If not, I'll just I'll say it orally. All right, I'm not seeing it. Let me try one more place quickly. Right, it says Vayar Aron. Right, it says the Midrash says that Aron saw. Right, what is it that he saw? It says he saw what was happening with. He saw what had happened to Chor. Right, in other words, according to the Midrash, Bnei Israel had come to them and said, "Moshe's not coming back. Let's have some sort of replacement." So Chor, being a good guy, what does Chor do?
No.
He says, "No, you can't do that." And what does Bnei Israel do? They kill him. Right? So Aaron realized, okay, you know what? I'm the only thing that stands between them. It's not, it sounds like, he just didn't want to die, but he realized, if they kill him, now they're going to do it anyway. He figured that maybe he could slow them down. Right? I mean, again, the Gemara makes it very clear that everything that he did was very much l'shem shamayim. So it's very interesting. If you look, there's nowhere. I noticed this last week's parasha in Kitisa, after this sin where some of the people involved in the Cheit HaEigel are killed. And some of the, Moshe says, Chata Gedola. There's never really a punishment for Aron. Aron is never, Moshe speaks a little bit harshly to him, okay, but there's never really a punishment. Again, it's sort of like this idea almost that he had to be part of this, right? And we'll come back to that in a second. But again, in terms of Betzalel ben Uri ben Chor, originally he was chosen because he was going to be designing a mishkan which was going to represent Briat Haolam. Now, why is he being chosen? Because what is the mishkan there for? To make up for the Cheit HaEigel. Why is he the right one to do it? Because his grandfather was the one who tried to stop it. Betzalel is now chosen not because he's just this great artist, but because let the grandson, right? Just like we say that the Para Aduma is to make up for the Cheit HaEigel, or the Zahav of the Mishkan is to make up for the Cheit HaEigel, let the grandson of the one who was killed, Betzalel ben Uri ben Chor, make up for the sin, where as part of it, his grandfather was murdered. Right? And in terms of the luchot are it's much less exciting. Who makes the second set of luchot? Moshe himself. Moshe, instead of, again, the first set of these ideal set, this perfect set representing God creates them and Moshe brings it down. This time God says, Psal lacha shnei luchot avanim, karishonim, go and make a second set. You, Moshe, you make it, you bring it up. There's nothing magical about it. The Malachim don't have to, I don't mean magical, but I'm saying, but there's nothing like spiritual, mystical. The Malachim don't have to say, don't give it to him. There's no special, it's man-made luchot. It's a relationship, created by man, right? In other words, there's the perfect relationship which God desires, and then there's the relationship that man can only have, right? Why do we need kapara? Because we're imperfect. The luchot that we have is imperfect. The aron that we have is imperfect. And therefore the luchot as well, the second set, and they go together, the broken set to remind us of this ideal relationship which we broke and which we should always strive towards. But the real set, the set that represents human beings. And right, and finally, in terms of in terms of Aharon, right? Why is Aharon now the perfect Kohen Gadol? Because think about it. What is the role of the Kohen Gadol, right? He's the one who goes lifnai v'lifnim. He's the one who goes. He's the only one who's allowed to go into the Kodesh Kodashim. According to most Meforshim, only allowed to go in once a year on Yom Kippur. According to the Vilna Gaon, he's allowed to go in other times. But even so, he's the one who gets forgiveness for the Jewish people. And Aron, before the Cheit HaEigel, was almost perfect. He had this massively big heart, right? He's the one who, when he finds out that Moshe is going to be the leader, he has no jealousy. He's the one who, again, had, Ohev Shalom, Rodev Shalom. He's got this massively big heart. There's only one thing that he lacks: failure, right? In other words, how do you help somebody make up for their sin if you don't know what that is? It's like I always used to say, the worst principals are the ones who are like, I don't mean like principals to have good principles in your life. I mean like principals who run schools. See, the ones who are like the ones who never misbehaved, right? You can never really get who kids are if you yourself didn't go through those things. Those principals who themselves were always like the A student and the valedictorian and brought an apple to the teacher every day. Aharon, again, he has everything. He's the one who literally, he can go lifnai v'lifnim. He's the one who was able to speak to Paro with complete, but he doesn't understand the idea of tshuva. He's never had to do tshuva himself. Right, and the aron who now is going to serve in this mishkan, which again, this mishkan represents this imperfect relationship, this one that we need kapara, this one where our relationship with God is imperfect and we're always messing up and always trying to fix it. Aron had, and that's what I think Chazal mean when they say like Aron had to do this, right? Because how could he help people bring about tshuva for themselves if he's never had to do it for himself? And that's why I didn't bring all the other examples, but if you look where for the rest of the there's so many midrashim, right? It says like when in Parshat Nasa, when all the Nisi'im bring have their Parak Zion, the 89 pasuk Parak, and they all bring their gifts, and it says like Aron is like crestfallen, he's devastated, right? What does he think to himself? Why can't I be involved in the gifts of the Mishkan? Cheit HaEigel. Right? And it says Moshe has to bring him forth. For the rest of his life, Aharon represents not just the one who can, who this high level, the one who can speak to the king, but the one who can speak to the king despite the fact that he's human, despite the fact that he messed up. Right? In other words, now he has a real chance to help them to make up, because he himself has been through it. And that's why I think also, like, he didn't really have to be punished. It wasn't really. It was almost like that thing. It was almost like he was like forced into doing an avirah. It was almost like I don't think Chazal use it over here, but there's this term, avirah lishma. When you do an avirah, but like for the pure purpose of, this is what needs to be done in God's world at this moment. They don't quite say that about him, but that's what it seems like. It seems like Aaron had to have a sin. He had to have something that was going to make it, that would make it that he could bring about tshuva. So, just to quickly summarize, and since Victor's not here tonight, we can make it a little bit of a shorter shiur. In other words, we have these two relationships with God. We have this ideal relationship, represented by the ideal luchot and the ideal mishkan and the ideal aron, and both aron and aharon, and the Batzalel who knows how to create the world. And that's and that's something to strive for. But it's not something we can never fully have a perfect relationship with God, right? Ki lo yor ali hadam v'chai. It's just inherent to being human beings. We can never fully get those perfect luchot. They have to break. They just, we try to grab onto God, and we're left with pizzas. We're left with, it says like Moshe made the second set of luchot, psalacha, the Midrash says, psolet, like the leftovers from the first set. Like we're left with pieces. We can grasp God a little bit. Like there are times where we feel this like closeness with God, and then like the next day it's gone. Like like I was saying, like on Purim, like after I drank, and really it's the one time a year. I'm so not a drinker. But like I davened Ma'ariv that night, and it was just like, I don't know, I just felt like this like closeness to God that I hadn't felt in so long in my davening. My davening has just been like awful. And I just felt this like closeness to God, and it was just like, I didn't want it to end. And it's like the next day when I davened, it was just like gone. And that's the thing. Like we have this ideal relationship we want to have with God. We have this, and and sometimes again we think we like grab on, we think we have it, and for a moment we do, but we're just left with like the leftovers. We're left over with this little taste, these little occasional reminders, and that's really all we can have. And that's really the idea of tshuva. It's this constant attempt to get close to God, and then maybe getting too close or not going close enough, and failing and falling back, and being willing to rise up again a second time. That's what that's what this relationship's about, and that's ultimately what the mishkan is about. It's this chance, that to have, to have this close relationship with Hashem even after we mess up. Right? Famously, we know that the Chazal tell us when they destroyed, when Titus destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, he went in and he saw the mishkan. And he went to the mishkan, into the mikdash, and he saw the aron, and the two kruvim, these two angels, were embracing each other. And he said, look at these disgusting Jews. This is what they have in their holiest place. And Chazal said no, they didn't understand. He said the two kruvim, they represent the relationship between God and the Jewish people. And it's interesting at that moment, right? The Beit HaMikdash is being destroyed. We're far from God, and yet at that moment God is grasping us. Even at our worst moments, even when we're far away from God and we fail to live up to who we could be, and we're the mikdash and the aron and the luchot, the second set of luchot are a reminder to us that no matter how far away we are, no matter how distant we are from the ideal, that if we just keep that ideal in mind and keep on shooting for it, that there's always a second, a way of fixing the relationship, and it's more than just one time, that Hashem, is ultimately is Hashem, who of Rachamim, and Hashem who accepts, slicha and kapara and tshuva. So, may we always strive for that first set of luchot, but realize that, inherently we're never going to, we're never going to fully, succeed. Lo alecha amlacha ligmor. But, even when you mess up, even when we mess up, right? Teachers sometimes pretend it's only their students who mess up, but even when we mess up, we should remember that we can always, fix things up, and there's always a second mishkan, there's always a second luchot, there's always a second chance from Hashem. Shabbat shalom.